Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Well, you know what? You're on Untold Radio. This is episode 35.
Powering through them,
probably one of the most important episodes we're ever going to do with a friend and a colleague and a person who's so well respected and high credentialed. It's Alex Zannoni.
That's right.
And the topic is psychotherapy, trauma, and the anomalous. The tiny sound like a tuning fork at the end there just sets you into a meditative state. Now, the first thing we need to say, of course, which we do every week, is that we are broadcasting on stolen land. It's part of the Gadigal Nation and the Eora people. Have I got that back to front?
The Eora Nation.
Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Next week, you're doing it. And we want to acknowledge and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Yep.
And you know what I reckon, Aspasia?
What's that?
It's about time.
Jay?
We want to pay our respects. Let's just give them the land back. All right? Let's just do that.
That's not
And that'll
gonna happen,
solve this
unfortunately.
conundrum we have at the start here.
I know.
And excuse us, all our respect to our Indigenous culture. Now, we have an astounding guest.
Yes, we do.
And an incredible episode. It's episode 35. This is we're proud to be part of the Untold Radio Network. But with us is an incredible credentialed psychotherapist, a person who's dealt with many forms of trauma, distress, and depression, and has spent basically his entire life trying to uplift the community around him. So welcome to Down South Anomalies, Alex Zannoni.
Hello, Jay. Hello, Aspa. Great to be with you. And
we're
thank
so
you very much
excited.
for all your work.
And we're so excited to have you, and what's behind you is your profound library, and I love to see a hard media library.
Isn't it wonderful? Yes, it's the only type of library. I can't stand looking at things on the screen, so I continually buy books, which drives my better half absolutely up the wall. But anyway, that's the way it is.
She's got a few of her books in there too. And
Yes.
Thank you so much to the beautiful Bronwyn for giving us some time with this man. Now, what I'm going to do at the start here is we were sent a disclaimer by Untold Radio.
Yes, we were.
And I'm not very fond of the disclaimer, but I understand why, because there was a week's worth of banning there where someone came on and said something. We're going to put that disclaimer up,
Yes.
but then we're going to screen our version
kind
of the
of disclaimer,
disclaimer.
what we like to
let's
use.
just live
Yep.
through this to begin with.
Yep.
So that's
Okay.
fair enough,
That's-
considering.
that's
But, you know,
yeah.
to me, one of our guests might find that offensive. So let's put this up, which I think is a much more egalitarian
Some will find it
disclaimer.
offensive, others won't. That's the way the world works. Not everything makes everybody happy.
Okay.
Sometimes somebody's going to be upset about something, you know,
All right.
and they just got to deal with it and move forward.
Let's go to our standing Robert Anton Wilson and see what he says about that.
Never believe fully in anybody else's BS. I don't care if it's Roger Nish, the Pope, L. Ron Hubbard, Al Gore, George Bush, or I don't care who it is. Don't swallow all their belief system totally. Don't accept all of their bullshit, all their BS. The second rule is like unto the first. Don't believe totally in your own BS, which means that, as Bucky Fuller said, the universe consists of non-simultaneously apprehended events. Non-simultaneously. The universe consists of non-simultaneously apprehended events, which means any belief system or reality tunnel you've got right now is going to have to be revised and updated as you continue to apprehend new events later in time, not simultaneously. This is the natural functioning of the human brain. It's the way children's brains perform before they're wrecked by the school system. It's the way the minds of all great scientists and artists work. But once you have a belief system, everything that comes in either gets ignored if it doesn't fit the belief system, or it gets distorted enough so that it can fit into the belief system. You got to be continually revising your map of the world.
And Robert Anton Wilson, your heart is in ours forever. And let's
Yeah,
keep
I love that name. It's
continuously
hilarious.
revising that map of the world, because it is
Well, you kinda do.
non-simultaneously apprehended events.
Because, you come across information that kind of either proves you wrong, or you need to readjust your thinking patterns, and you go, okay, sure, I've got more information now. Now I can, go down this path. But yeah, sometimes people, they get something, and that's it. They're never going to veer from it at all. And that's a bit, that's like, if you can't bend, you're going to break.
All right.
Yep.
So what I think we should do right at the
Mhm,
beginning here is just get a little history on your career, and maybe an explanation, Alex, if that's possible, for what led you into the work of a psychotherapist and what actually psychotherapy is.
Yeah, thank you. Well, strangely enough, it started well before I entered into my professional career and my degrees. I graduated first with an honours degree in sociology and politics, and at the time my thesis focused on the development of what we term competitive consciousness within primary schools. Very interested in the way environments created both malevolent competition, but also quite positive competition within primary school age children.
Right.
Then that led me into doing a social work degree back in 1985, which went for 2 years. And in those days, we had a split system whereby you either went into policy or you went into the clinical area. And I chose to go into the clinical area. Once having graduated in '87, I worked with now the defunct Commonwealth Rehabilitation Service, which existed since 1943 up till about, I think, 2005. The Howard government put an end to that, and it was set up specifically to assist returned servicemen and women from World War II and subsequent wars, but it also assisted people with a whole range of sensory, psychiatric, physical disabilities to, if they chose to return to work. So the clients that I came across had primarily psychiatric disabilities. There were people with sensory and physical disabilities, but on the whole, psychiatric disabilities ranging from anything from depression to schizophrenia. So I was there for about 10 years, and it was a good grounding in the area of psychosocial therapy, which was invaluable in moving into private practice, which I did in 1996, and stayed in private practice up until 2020, and ran my own psychotherapy trauma practice as a accredited clinical mental health social worker, and also as a clinical hypnotherapist. And I also trained in the early 2010s as a clinical neuro-psychotherapist, so bringing in neuroscience into the area of psychotherapy. Yes, as you said at the beginning, I came across a whole range of traumas, anything from, say, from robberies to war trauma to sexual assault, to workplace traumas. So it was quite a wide gamut. And the therapy would last anywhere from, it may only be a matter of months, but on the whole, it would last between anywhere from 2 to 5 years with certain clients.
Would you be in that clinical practice primarily dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder? Was that a sign of things like that? Or I guess it was a much larger umbrella at the end of the day?
That would probably have been the main diagnosis of people, and then subsequently depression and anxiety as comorbid conditions.
Because post-traumatic, post-traumatic stress disorder isn't just from people who go to war. It's from any kind of a situation that you've been in that you don't normally. So if you've been attacked by someone when you've never been attacked before, you've got post-traumatic stress disorder from that, because you have to deal with it and try and integrate it into your life. So everything that happens that's a traumatic event can leave you with, and probably does leave you with, some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder.
So how does a psychotherapist work through someone with post-traumatic stress disorder?
Very carefully and very slowly. Even though a few of the therapies that I was trained in through my degree, and also subsequent to the degree, because we had to, certainly in the area that I was practicing, we had to earn a minimum of 100 points each year, which had to expose us to all the current therapies that were coming through, whether it be, mindfulness, CBT, eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, clinical hypnosis, the whole range of areas. And look, myself and a few of my colleagues, we tend to debug the system a little bit, because the clients we were receiving had experienced absolutely horrible traumas, and these traumas weren't going to be resolved in 10 sessions. So we were fortunate enough to work with GPs and psychiatrists who understood this, and we could work with people long term. And normally we would begin to see symptoms abating at around about 2 years. Now, and the neuroscience that was coming out from, say, the late 1990s up until I finished practicing in 2020 was very clear about this, that things take time. They may not take 20 years to resolve, but at the same time, they won't take 10 sessions to resolve, because the neurological damage that's done, the psychosocial damage that's done, takes time to repair. And people's consensus reality is absolutely shattered as a result of their trauma.
Yeah, and I guess that is just, it can't get worse than that. I'm surprised that your clinical practice, and I guess that's got to do with years and years of work out there in the field, I'm surprised that it actually was in 2020 that you had to stop that. And I take what we went through in terms of that worldwide situation was one of the reasons. But I am tending to see now in the people around us, especially our colleagues from all sorts of life, are all suffering signs of some sort of trauma or depression, because I think in a way we avoid actually the notion of introspectively looking at our mortality, and the last 3 years have actually taken people to that point. And I'm going to grab our cat.
I was hoping him to that point.
I'll take him up and just keep going with on that point there with Alex. I'll remove him because we wanted to keep him there. We've got a very old cat.
He was asleep and now he's awake every time. Anyway, so you go with your. Yes, you go ahead with your spiel there, Alex, and Jamie will sort him out in no time.
Yes. So just to give more of a context, I mean, referrals came from several areas. It came from health clinics, from various programs that the Commonwealth were running, also victims of crime referrals, and also through word of mouth, which through the Medicare system, people would have to receive either a GP referral or a psychiatrist referral. So, being an accredited clinical mental health social worker under the Medicare system, we would be receiving referrals, through the various programs. So it was, you could almost say that it was the salad days of that type of work, because an enormous amount of money was put into the system, both by both sides of politics. They recognised that mental health was crucial,
Right.
and that was very valuable for a lot of people on low incomes. So the majority of people I dealt with were on low incomes. There was the occasional millionaire from time to time, but I certainly focused on people with low incomes. Also because of my experience in CRS, the Commonwealth Rehab Service, had a lot of people coming through on pensions as well, and disability pensions.
Yeah. So what, I look around, I have friends who, who tell me stories about their parents, when they were growing up. So we're going like back, 40, 50 years ago. And it's, what they tell, they'll tell me stories about their childhood. And I'm thinking, this person is undiagnosed, had mental health issues, major mental health issues. The parents
Yes.
of this person. And of course, there was nowhere. You didn't go anywhere. You didn't, do anything about it. You just sucked it up and buried it. And then all these, these things happened to the family that they took it out. They tried to live their life, a normal life, yet that there's major trauma that was not being attended to, that wasn't being, sorted out. And the family and, the children or the wife or the husband had to take the full brunt of to deal with this person. Yet it sounds like a lot of people, the majority of the population had some sort of kind of trauma on the spectrum. But people just got through life and just did it. How possible, but now
did they do it in a constructive way? We
No,
deal with
no, they
still
did it.
people
They
now with
didn't do it.
maybe a
That's what I'm s-
psychological damage
But
because
that's what I'm
of that.
saying to you. It's like, I've got friends that have been scarred and traumatized by their upbringing because they had a parent who had gone through some trauma that was not diagnosed, not recognized, and just they were left to deal with it as best or as worst they could. And so, this dysfunctional person that hadn't been treated then, brought up their children in a dysfunctional way and sent them out into the world. And so you've got dysfunction breeding dysfunction. It's like, I'm amazed that the world is actually not, everybody's killing each other all the time. Do you know what I mean? It's just,
I guess
I just think to myself, all these poor people that had all this stuff happen to them, nobody went to anyone to speak about it.
But we also have a culture where the notion, I don't know whether you'd agree with this, but especially back then in the 50s and 60s,
And
to actually go and see a
the
psychiatrist
40s,
or a
30s,
psychotherapist
20s, forever.
was stigmatizing.
Oh, yeah,
People
yeah.
would see it as weakness.
Yeah. So everybody was normal, but they weren't. Everybody was dealing with something on their own, not even recognizing that this was some sort of a mental health issue that they needed to get some sort of help for, but never did.
Well, I think of, and we've discussed this before, I think of my father who lived through the Second World War, and well, he grew up just before fascism came to Italy, so he was part of that young generation of fascism. And throughout that period, he understood that, well, this was, clearly insanity on a large political and social scale. And luckily, during the war, he was in an area of Calabria where his captain had said, "Well, boys, things are going in the wrong way or the right way, and we're just going to keep our heads down." And when the Americans and the British finally landed in the boot of Italy and went through that area, my father was lucky enough to be part of the American Transport Corps. So he went up through the boot, through Italy, and saw some of the horrors that the Germans had committed. his good friend, who was also a commando, was on the Russian front. Their unit absconded because they could see that the horrific atrocities the SS were committing. So they put their own lives in danger and went back into Italy and fought with the partisans to drive the Germans out. Now, they immigrated to Australia in the late 40s and early 50s. Now, my father and his friend never spoke of the horrors, at least openly to us, but they did experience the horrors, and I think what kept them together, and they didn't enter into what we could see, or what I could see as I look back on that era, into any major psychiatric disability, was the sense of community, both within their families, but also ex-servicemen. They would get together at various clubs and speak about the bad times, but they kept each other propped up, so to speak. Because there was that sense of community. There was a strong sense of community, as you would know, Asper, with the Greek community, the Italian community, and I think that's what kept them more or less on a steady level. Now, yes, to have gone to a psychiatrist to discuss these things, well, it's a great no-no.
No, you just didn't.
No, you just didn't. No.
But you know what's fascinating there, and we're going to discuss, part of the history of psychiatry, psychotherapy, and psychology in a sense, is that going back originally, what I was reading about, what I was researching, said that it was a lack of community in a lot of people that they began to notice virtually centuries ago, that this disruption to the notion of a strong community bond around you was one thing that started to lead towards looking at these disorders as being part of a spectrum of disorders. So I think that socializing and, now socializing, we've got all this incredible connectivity, but paradoxically, we're all alone with it.
Yeah, we are. We're
People
more
are
isolated.
alone in their lounge room on a computer. So at the end of a conversation, that's all over, and they're left again in their isolation. And I think that's something we saw through the last 3 years as well. So maybe you can enlighten us a little bit that what led historically to the birth of psychiatry and psychotherapy.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people, if we look at modern day therapy, we draw it back to, as some people may disagree with me on this, but we go back to Freud, the neurologist, before he developed psychoanalysis. Now, for all its sins, he was ahead of his the time from a neurology point of view, because a lot of his observations have been coming quite apparent in modern neuroscience. Freud could see back in Vienna that things were beginning to fall apart. And of course, around about the same time, you have the esteemed sociologist Emile Durkheim, whose seminal work on suicide was bringing forth this idea that modern industrialization was creating such disconnection between individuals, families, groups. And I think it was him or Marx who used the terms Gemeinschaft, meaning the German term meaning for a close-knit community, a village, as opposed to what was coming out of the Industrial Revolution. They termed Gesellschaft, so more of a disconnected, larger community like in the modern industrial urban cities. And so, seeing that, it was no surprise that people like Freud and Jung started to see this whole disconnection and the rise of neuroses. And of course, with the First World War, well, that threw everything out the window, didn't it? With large-scale traumatic grief, trauma, death, and it spurred along an attempt at understanding mental illness, or at that time neuroses, anxieties, and I think, unfortunately, things like war pushes this research forward, and it's quite sad. But of course, psychotherapy was pretty much dominated by a psychoanalytic paradigm up until around about starting in the late 1950s, when you started having people like Albert Ellis who developed rational emotive therapy. who could see that people didn't have to spend 10 years on the couch, so to speak, to reach some sort of understanding, even though he was a classically trained psychoanalyst himself. And the behaviourists started to come along, and they came up with their view of behaviour and how that's formulated. And then it's broadened out to, again, I think it's come full circle to a psychosocial economic understanding of mental illness, and pairing up with the incredible advances in neuroscience that continues to happen. We're getting a better understanding about how individuals operate on a psychological level, but also at the same time on a social level, and how these two areas interact. So, today we do have more neuroscience-informed therapy, but at the same time, clinical neuropsychotherapy says, well, we've got to start with the person on the ground within society to see how they're actually formed, and then pair that with the neurology of what's going on. And I think that's where I became quite excited in the last 10 years of my professional career, reading up as much as I could in those areas, because the whole clinical neuropsychotherapy sounds as though it's reductionist, but it's not. It's quite the opposite. Sorry, I've ranted a bit there.
No, I love that rant, and I'll get you to explain that more in a minute. But Jung and Freud, I mean, they were both revolutionary. They changed the whole notion. But, I mean, psychotherapy had a very bumpy start, excuse the pun here, with a bit of this sort of stuff.
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, if we want to go that
yes.
Yeah.
And that was a crazy sort of eugenics-based science that you could actually detect the personality traits
by looking at them,
and by feeling their head, by feeling the bumps in their heads. Criminal
profile.
Well,
on the other side of my library here, I do have my friend Mr. Phrenology Head on the other side. So I'd be very careful as to what you say about him.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Is that what it is there?
Yes. That's the one.
Very interesting start. And then you had radicals like this gentleman, Kraft Ebing, who wrote these extraordinary books. I mean, this book is unbelievable. Have you
seen the film?
Have we led to believe that his clinical practice, was it anything like yours? Did you see like nearly 1,000 of the vast spectrum of sexual deviance in your practice whatsoever? That's an astounding book from the turn of the 20th century. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Look, it's gone in all different directions. And then you have people like, Reich. Although Reich did write an incredible book about fascism.
Yes, he did.
That was a deep analysis of fascism.
Absolutely.
But none of these people are saints. Far from it. But at the same time, they had some pretty interesting light bulb moments.
Well, I mean, they're incredible epiphanous moments. Look, one thing that I'm really curious about is primarily the human hominid seems to have this spectrum disorder, and at times very radically. Does that translate? Can we see any sort of resemblance, reflection in the animal kingdom, or is this something specific to the human being?
That's a very good question. I don't know. I think I look at my dogs, and dogs are dogs. Sure, at times you could almost interpret that they experience, grief themselves. Of course they do, and trauma. But they resolve it, or they appear to resolve it in a very interesting way, and it gets down to their own neurobiology. I mean, whenever you see a dog sleeping and having what appears to be a nightmare, as soon as they wake up, the first thing they do is they actually shake it off.
Yeah,
literally, they shake it off. They shake off the memory, the trauma, and they just get on being a dog.
But you can say that if a dog or a cat is showing signs of some kind of anxiety or whatever, it could be because we've taken it out of its, hanging out and doing what it should be doing and living a life in a house with people, being what we need it to be for us, and if we're neurotic, the dog or the cat is going to be
Absolutely.
neurotic. It's
Yep.
not just living really a real dog or cat life. It's actually,
Mm.
pandering
Highly
to the
domesticated.
human. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. And that's not a natural state for it.
No.
You know what I
No.
mean? That's not what it's supposed to be doing. So if
Mm.
animals do have any kind of anxieties or issues, then it's human caused, because we've
Mm.
taken it out of what should be its natural habitat, which should be out in the forest
Mm.
or in the woods or wherever, doing what dogs and cats would normally be doing. And we've ensconced them, and they're our pets, and they're there for our needs.
Mm.
Something is marked as schizophrenia, and I had an entire musical band there over the course of a couple of decades, where many of the musicians were suffering what was termed to be schizophrenia. And at times I looked at them and their insight and their ability to
Oh, yeah.
discard the veneer of Western culture and be far more honest and emotionally upfront was quite astounding. And historically, looking back, there are moments where my mind tends to believe that maybe possibly these disorders, bipolar disorder, what we used to term manic depression, schizophrenia, might have been traits that were seen in tribal culture as shamanic. What's your perception on that?
More than likely. And it would have been interesting to get into a time machine and go back to those times to see how the community and how the individual actually processed delusions, and how the community catered for that. Because you have and I have in my work the absolute horrible toll that something like schizophrenia can have on a person's life. And I'm not saying that you're doing this, but a lot of people tend to romanticize it, and they did during the 60s. R.D. Laing came along and he was trying to understand it further, but through the mists of time, his work's been distorted. But we have to live in this reality and understand that, yes, people with a variety of mental illnesses will have insight into what may be happening around them. But at the same time, what a challenging life, and absolutely full of pain that I've seen.
Horrible.
I can't help but feel that things like schizophrenia, because of that notion that we brought up before of the industrial age, the technological age, causing a disruption in our sense of community. Because my thoughts on reading back on that as soon as these people would show these moments of enlightenment or psychosis / psychosis, that tribal community would come in and support their basic hygiene and care, take a small percentage of enlightenment away, but they actually nurse those people through that psychosis. And again, using plant forms of medication to actually assist them. And we also know now there is a new revolution beginning in terms of psychedelics, and that being utilized in the fields of depression. In one of our earlier podcasts, we spoke to a pharmacist who was desperately trying to set up a ketamine clinic here in Sydney and one in London to assist with depression post-pandemic. So how is your notion, how do you see that whole notion of the psychedelic and its ability to assist in terms of trauma and therapy?
I think, again, I came in the tail end of this, but from my own readings and what some clients were experiencing through early trials, because we've had some trials down here in Victoria, the use of various mood-altering drugs is, I think it's looked on far more favourably now, and I think the studies are far more, I won't say strict, but it's held to a higher level of scientific investigation than it would have been back in the 60s and early 70s. And there were a whole host of reasons as to why that was back then. But now, certainly within the United States, they're seeing some very, very good, promising results with people, returned soldiers from Afghanistan and Iraq, they're getting some very, very good results as far as not only PTSD, but depression and anxiety. The symptoms are abating, which is very interesting. It holds out, some hope. But at the same time, we shouldn't start believing too quickly about what's happening in the echo silo of some of these areas. We have to have our feet on the ground to see, well, some people will benefit, I suspect, greatly from it, as some people greatly benefit from traditional psychotherapy and others won't. And I think the research has to move into the area of, well, why are people benefiting and why aren't they? And not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as so often, if there's a negative study, then, people tend to globalize that and catastrophize it and want to shut down genuine scientific research.
Yeah, because what works for some doesn't for others. So there could be a lot of different cures, different ways to go, depending on who you. It's like learning. Some people learn orally, some people learn visually. They're still learning, but they're doing it in different ways. And so for everything, there's got to be, there's certain ways to go for each different individual.
I think we're also looking back historically on a much more naive culture than we are now, but there are a lot of really good clinical trial studies. Even Timothy Leary did astounding ones with people that had been in prison for a while and showed major percentage differences into those people's ability not to going back inside and rehabilitated. But those studies were so demonized in their time. I mean, Leary was put in jail in terms of that stuff. But I think we've hit a new era in that regard.
We have.
What we should do now is go into the area where we actually cross from the anomalous into what you've been doing. Because of my background and my wife's background as therapists, but, not well-respected therapists that are still being questioned, occupational therapists. But, we sort of took that mandate with us into the real world. But also when we started to do anomalous research, we would have and have still got many people coming to us today that actually show signs of post-traumatic disorder, stress disorder, that I don't believe you get from a nightmare. I don't believe you get from one of these stories that sounds so beyond what our reductionist reality will accept.
Or from a fantasy or a
So I know
hallucination,
that you've got client confidentiality there that you have to keep.
Well, we don't want names.
But I'd be so curious about any cases that you may have dealt with that you can speak generally that were outside.
Well, can I ask Alex first? Were you open, like when you first went into practice, were you open to like anomalous stuff? So if somebody came to you with a scenario of being abducted by aliens, where would you have been, back then?
Well, probably in if we should have another chat in the future, as the Americans would say, I had a certain amount of skin in the game when it came to anomalous experiences. When they first started to appear, which was fairly early in my career, I took note of them, but I really wasn't ready to investigate them or to discuss them any further.
Right. So what I'm asking is, had you ever read or were you up on that subject? Or did just people start coming to you with stories and you were like, what is going on here? Where's this coming from?
The short answer is yes.
Yeah,
yes.
right. Okay.
I was doing parallel reading at the time.
Okay.
As people were presenting with these experiences. But the interesting thing was that I never went out proactively to search for these experiences with people. What had happened was, particularly in my private practice, when I was seeing certain people long term, it was towards the end of their therapy, say towards the end of the third year, entering into the fourth year, their symptoms had abated, they were re-engaging with life, albeit with a different view on life as a result of their traumas. And they, to a T, all of them would just look at me one day and get this glazed look and say to me, well, you might think I'm crazy, but, and they would venture into stories.
Mm.
And at that point, we would have long discussions about this and couch it in the terms as a resolution of their trauma, but also it gave them insight into they were having these anomalous experiences very, very early on in childhood as well. So we would have dealt with the post-traumatic stress. That's what they were referred to me for, and then they would start discussing these experiences. I can discuss
So was
a
the
couple.
post?
Sorry.
Was the
Yep.
post-traumatic stress that they came to you for something totally different, or was it part of this thing, like the part of the abduction scenario?
Well, that's interesting. Totally different.
Mm.
Absolutely, totally
Right.
different.
Okay.
And that's where, if this cohort of people, I think, I mean, that they're telling me stories, but this cohort of people, I came to understand that they were extremely genuine. They didn't have to tell me this at all,
Mm-hmm.
because, as I said, I wasn't prompting for this. These people, these clients, did not know each other. There was no connection with these people. They came from different referral sources, different stratas of society. They just didn't cross paths, and yet these experiences were coming up from a range of socio-economic groups. And so, as I said, to a T, these people within the end of their therapy would begin to discuss these anomalous experiences, which ranged from anything from, say, ghost, poltergeist, to fully blown experiences of cigar-shaped UFOs hovering over their houses.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And I think what's fascinating about that is that, we can reference many academics like yourself throughout the history of culture that have reached sort of like a crossroads. And one of them was the astounding late, great John Mack. Now, you can't get better than the head of psychiatry at Harvard, really.
Well.
This man had already done massive studies into so many things. He'd done studies into teenage suicide. He'd done a lot of trauma work, John Mack.
Yep.
He also is a Nobel laureate for The Prince of Our Disorder. Amazing book he wrote. And let's just pop this last book up. This book I need to read because he had a scene change. Now, he came together, I think initially what prompted him into the field was witnessing the work of Bud Hopkins, who was already utilized. He was a UFO researcher, but an abstract artist out of New York City. And he was already utilizing hypnosis as a tool to investigate these cases further. And it's so interesting to hear that hypnosis is one of the skills in your background. Maybe tell us a little bit about hypnosis and if you've ever used that to investigate these cases, or it's something you wouldn't do.
I just to backtrack a bit, I had the good fortune to meet Bud Hopkins back in 1997 at the International UFO Symposium in Brisbane, which was run by the Queensland MUFON chapter. And we spent a couple of days together and we discussed a lot of cases. And we discussed hypnosis. And at that time, I was just entering into the training course for hypnosis. I know that a lot of people do use regressive hypnosis with people with various anomalous experiences. I never have, because my approach to hypnosis has always been that the person that's presenting to me is already pretty much in a trance. And I would call that the trance of post-traumatic stress or depression or whatever their ailment may be. So my work was very much about, and I would say this to clients, it's about dehypnotizing you, taking you out of that trance and re-engaging you with your goals and your strengths. Now, the way we do that is to take time and to take you out of this trance. Now, one of the therapies that was really useful that I found was EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and that's one of two therapies that was deemed efficacious for post-traumatic stress disorder treatment, which came out of America back in the late 90s. And that seemed to be, for me and for the cohort of clients, a far better way of reintegrating the memory and the experience in a very safe way of what happened to people. So they actually had a lot of agency in bringing those memories back with that particular therapy. Now, after that, I probably would have used a bit of hypnosis to just re-engage people back with their strengths, but at a time when they were far more stable. So I was a bit loath to use clinical hypnosis with people that were, weren't, where their major symptoms hadn't abated.
Did you
I'd
have
probably use it later?
Did you have a respect for Bud Hopkins' usage of it? Do you think Bud was quite clinical in his approach and didn't lead anyone from what you ascertained? I know there was only a short time you were with him, but you were with him.
Yeah, I think he was highly respectful of clients, or of the people he worked with. And that's what some of the feedback I received from various people, independent of Bud. But it's hard to say, right? It's hard to say, Jay, very hard. But from what I saw of those 2 days with Bud, he was quite a, if I can put it in these terms, he was quite a grandfatherly figure.
Yes.
So he did emit a lot of trust and a lot of care, and that came across quite strongly. He never discussed people out of context, that's for sure.
I think he was quite overwhelmed to begin with when he first started investigating. There was a case very close to his home in the 60s that he looked into, right. And I think he might have experienced that with his parents as well, and never taken the subject too seriously up to that point. And he was overwhelmed by the response, just like Whitley Strieber was, from other people that seem to have similar experiences. Personally, down my perception tunnel, I've always had a great fear of hypnosis in revealing too many deep, dark secrets in the soul. Is it going to be brought up that why I was caught masturbating late one night? And, is that going to come up during hypnosis?
That is not a deep, dark secret.
But, it's
just told everyone.
I think a lot of people have those fears of hypnosis too.
And rightfully so.
Is it going to actually pull out an event and make me feel less traumatized, or is it going to traumatize me more? And sometimes too, as you were saying, it seems advantageous to researchers that might be stepping over the line a little bit, trying to push their research into a certain direction. It seems to me, from a layman's perspective, that at times it appears quite easily to be able to lead people, especially if they're deeply hypnotically suggestive. And that's a fear I've always had with it. But a lot of good research and what looks like some reasonable therapy has come through people going through this process. What's your opinion?
I think it comes back to the individual and the type of hypnosis that's being practiced. I mean, I was trained under the Ericksonian, Milton Erickson's hypnotherapy school, and it was an approach. He was a psychiatrist in America, and his approach was that. And I'm sorry, I'm dumbing this down for myself.
No, you need to dumb it down for us and the audience. And I'm not saying our audience is dumb, but we are. Well, so don't ever apologize over that.
What I took from that training and from viewing they did a lot of videos of Milton Erickson, clinical videos, was the importance of the person undergoing hypnosis having the power and the agency through that process, so that it wasn't a sense of them being out of control at all. It was a sense of that they would have and regain control throughout the whole process. So it wasn't about having people, barking like a chicken. No, that's not hypnosis. I don't know what that is, but I think you could almost say it's abuse.
I've always felt it is that a lot of that stage hypnosis.
That stuff frightens
on
me.
a very
really
frightening level.
And I don't know why anybody would allow themselves to be
psychosexual stuff that goes on in the name of entertainment that seems really abusive and destructive.
You know why? Because people don't really believe that people go under.
Well, maybe this is a good point for you to explain to us what mesmerism, what hypnosis really is. What do you see it to be? Because it's still something that holds a very esoteric place in culture. And I could get quite paranoid and conspiratorial in the way that the validity of hypnosis still has not actually sunk into the mainstream mind, because it is a very valid, effective therapy in the right hands. But in popular
really
culture,
dangerous.
we're led to believe it's still something hokey that's a magic parlor trick.
Yes. I mean, that's a question that's been fought over for over a century, if not more, because depending on the type of school you're in, it will dictate what hypnosis is. But in the end, I think I came to an understanding for myself what's hypnosis? Well, life is. And by that I mean the moment we wake up in the morning, we need to have the ability to understand, well, what trance am I entering into today? Or what trance have I woken up in today? And how do I understand how that's going to limit my capacity to negotiate the world today and myself within this world? So if that makes any sense, I think that's where I came to the conclusion that I need to be aware of how am I operating throughout the day? Is it trance? Is it my trance? Is it someone else's trance? And at the same time, hypnosis isn't all about trance either. There's a school that says, well, trance schmance. It's more about linking in with who you are and how you operate and how you perceive the world. Now, again, that may confuse some people, but that's where I came to. And when I was doing hypnosis with people, it was also always about giving them a lot of education about what it is. And that would be with every therapy that I would use. That I'd say, look, go and read a number of books or a number of articles I'll provide for you. Let's have a decent discussion about what these approaches are, what you think hypnosis is, and then make a decision as to whether you'd like to enter into that or something else. And I think education is the key for people, because each person will experience their own hypnosis and what that means for them. And I think what drives a lot of, or certain schools and orthodox schools, is that it's highly individualized. Highly individualized. Yeah, it's not a pat system. And I would say that for any therapy.
That's a really fascinating point, and I think a profound moment in there. That's a very Taoist perspective when I think about it too, is that we should be more introspective about our brain state and work in a positive way to realign that every day of our life. Happiness is not something that just comes. Contentment and happiness needs to be worked on, and we need to be aware of how we affect others. And as we were stating about community before, the more that you adopt a positive mind think, eradicate, we have sold so much fear, especially in Western culture. I mean, that's what drives so much corporatocracy.
That's why I don't watch the news anymore.
Well, why do insurance companies exist? You know, I mean, primarily 95% of it's not about paying you back. It's about inducing fear so you can actually make money out of you. So I think that that's a really important point. Not many of us actually get up and go, okay, I need to restructure my thinking. I need to think clearly. What sort of level of cognitive behavior am I in today? And is my negativity, that could be anything from diet or bad sleep or whatever, can I realign that? And most of us can work and realign that. What are some simple things, people, that you would be aware of that could do easily to actually pick people up, to make them feel more motivated, more outside of that depressive loop that can occur in our culture?
Well, I think the basics, and this is going to sound very, very, very boring. But I think, well, I'll say what I do. I haven't drunk alcohol for 40 years, and that came out of my initial training in a detox unit in a hospital, where back then the elder clinicians and doctors and psychiatrists were basically saying to me, you're young, if you can stay away from this stuff, stay away from it, because we don't know what it does fully to the brain, but we've got a pretty good idea, and now we know, where a lot of research is coming through and saying, look, if you can avoid it, don't touch it. Now, I'm not taking that from it's not an easy thing to do. It's
not an easy thing for an Italian to do either, to sort of drop down that red seat. And Asper, you've never drunk in your entire life.
I made a decision when I was in my teens, early teens, at school. I was about 14, 15, and I decided that I didn't want to drink because I had a bit of a gestalt therapy done on me by the girls at school. They would, this was in the 70s. So it was these stories about they'd go out on a, Thursday night, because I'd hear the stories on Friday, and they would go to the pub. So this is mid 70s when, kids were getting into pubs and drinking and carrying on. And the horrific stories I heard from these girls, that they got so drunk, they couldn't even remember how they got home. Yeah. They couldn't remember what they'd done, who they'd been with, and what had happened to them. And I was like, why would you do that to yourself? Why would you get so drunk that you didn't even know how you got home, who you were with, or if you could have met up with a bunch of people that could have murdered you or raped you or anything. Why would you do that to yourself? That was just made no sense to me whatsoever. I didn't really like the taste of alcohol, so I thought, well, that's not going to be too hard to not do it. And so, when I started going out when I was 18, had a few drinks and stuff, didn't like I actually need to be in control of myself and my emotions. I don't like to be in any kind of altered state, and getting tipsy was like, oh no, I'm out of control. I'm not in control of what I'm feeling, what I'm saying, what I'm doing. This is not for me. And that was it. And I just went, not going to drink, don't drink, haven't drunk since I was about 18, 19.
And it is depressive.
It is depressive, exactly. And this might be a segue into, if you'd like me to discuss a couple of clients who had anomalous experiences.
We'd love you to.
But also another thing is, I always question my expectations. And I would say that with clients, and say one of the cornerstones of doing this work is for us to work towards, and it's probably impossible to do this fully, but work towards not having expectations. And if you do have an expectation or set of expectations for the day, step back and challenge them. Because 9 times out of 10, they're probably not based in reality. It's more of a wish or a hope. And again, this is not very popular with some people, but I always say, well, look, I think hope is the last bastion of the indolent and the delusional, because you're trying to create something out of nothing, or no clear vision or effort, and that's pretty indolent, when you come back to it, because you're not actually challenging yourself and drawing upon your own resources and learning to develop new resources. So I'd say that, look, challenge your expectations, but the number one worst drug that's legalized in the world is alcohol. We know that. Let's not muck around with that. We know, and having treated a lot of alcoholics, well, we all know that. But
look, it was an embalming fluid.
Well, look, it's
got its good uses.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you can go out and have a couple of drinks and it doesn't affect you adversely and you have a good time, that's great. But when you're drinking to excess because you can't stop, you can't help yourself, and you don't know what you're doing, what you're saying, and you're getting yourself into really difficult and dangerous situations, then clearly you should steer away.
You know
from
what?
it.
There is no judgment passed on.
No, of course not.
Because
absolutely not.
Everybody each to their own.
So many people have to deal with their depression in that
sure,
way.
I know. And sometimes self-medicating is the only way they can. Yeah, absolutely.
So we have to be.
Thing?
Yeah, we have to be very, very clear about this. That the people that I'm talking about come were in a specific cohort that if they continued to drink, they would only exacerbate their symptoms. And
Yes.
so we were very clear that, look, let's work towards either minimizing the amount of alcohol you're taking, or if you choose to stop it, we can get other resources in to help you, medical resources. We can continue with the therapy. That's not a problem. But if you want to get on top of what you've come here to do to our clinic, then let's work towards reducing that, because that's important. For other people, well, if they're not faced with these challenges, then that's different. That's very different. But through the work of the psychiatrist, Dr. Rick Strassman, who has done a lot of writing on DMT, dimethyltryptamine. It's really interesting that when us humans have these anomalous experiences, say at the age of 5 or 6 or 7, the research is saying that what's likely to happen at that point is endogenous DMT spikes, and so we're able to have these experiences and see these experiences, whatever they may be. And at later life, I mean, these experiences may be quite profound for some people, and they may be absolutely horrific for others. But for those that find it incredibly profound, again, there's a certain number of people who want to recreate that, and they may enter into the use of various substances in later life and become addicted. And unfortunately, what's happening there is the law of diminishing return, because our brains will suffer, and all our other organs will suffer. So, for a specific, again, I'm sorry to use this word again, but a specific cohort of people who are trying to deal with their traumas through the use of substances and want to recreate that profound experience, it gets a bit dicey, very, very dicey.
And it's never as profound as it is when it comes intuitively. And I think, just digressing quickly back to alcohol, I mean, being worked there as a therapist, I dealt with so many cases of Korsakoff syndrome. And I don't think people realize what a small amount of alcohol on a particular genetic strain will actually cause so much damage so quickly, so rapidly. And if we look at neurology, and that's where you have to exercise caution. But we're also digressing away from our point here, is that in the midst of these clinical moments, you have dealt with people that show signs of something that exists outside of what John Mack, as many times stated, initially he thought Bud Hopkins was losing the plot. He thought that the people coming to Bud were all dealing on the spectrum, not getting proper therapy. And then he reached an epiphanous moment where he said, no, these people aren't showing signs of trauma, or if they are, their trauma's not related to these other stories that they're manifesting. So maybe we'll step into that side of the coin now.
Okay. All right. Now, I want to preface this by saying that the couple of people that I'll speak about here, first of all, have been de-identified, heavily de-identified. So by discussing these people won't be able to identify. And secondly, there is no history of psychosis with these people, absolutely none. So before people start to think about, well, maybe it's just a reemergence of a psychosis. No, absolutely not. So let me talk about a couple of people here. Gentleman Thomas, who was 80 years of age when he came to see me. He was an ex-scientist, a physicist. He was married to Alison, his wife, for 60 years, and nursed Alison for 5 years as she was unfortunately slowly dying from pancreatic cancer. Thomas was referred to me by a psychiatrist for therapy to assist him with his complicated grief response, which was totally understandable. Poor sleep, having flashbacks back to some of the worst periods that he was nursing Alison through. We'd probably see each other every 2 to 3 weeks over a 3 to 4 year period, and approximately 2.5 years into our time together, his grief responses were beginning to abate. And in the final year of his therapy, Thomas discussed how Alison was very interested in survival consciousness post-death. Now, he emphasized to me that due to his scientific training and his career, this precluded him from any belief in accepting anything to do with the paranormal. Although he did respect Alison's views, but he said that he just couldn't really come around to that. 6 months remaining in the therapy, Thomas returned from a trip to Tasmania, which he and Alison took every year for 60 years, at a particular place in Tasmania, and they ended up buying a holiday house on the southern coast. Here's the clincher. Thomas started to discuss a paranormal experience, which raised my interest because knowing what his views are on paranormal experiences, he said, whilst I was sitting on the veranda of my holiday home, I spotted a woman emerging from the ocean in a full swimsuit. She walked over the sand and, to my surprise, walked onto my veranda and sat next to me. She smiled, and to my surprise, it was Alison. Thomas was
So Alison's
discussing
dead at this stage, right?
All
right, okay.
Alison's
Yeah.
dead.
Sorry.
Yep, Alison's
Right,
dead.
Yep.
And Thomas, through tears, discussed he and Alison spoke about their many Tasmanian holidays and the joys and struggles that every couple experience in raising a family. And he said, Alison's parting words to me were, hold tight, enjoy the view, and I'll see you sooner than you think.
Whoa.
Now, this was a significant challenge to Thomas's consensus reality. As a clinician, I feared that this may be a prelude to a psychotic break, but it wasn't. To the contrary, Thomas, and subsequently this was confirmed by his son and 2 daughters, that in his last remaining years, he experienced a calmness that his family had never experienced, and he devoted his remaining years to his grandchildren, teaching them to construct sailing boats.
Wow. There you go.
That is a remarkable and beautiful story.
Interesting.
Yeah, very.
And the postscript to that was that he also spent the last couple of years from a scientific point of view attempting to understand survival of consciousness from the physicist's point of view, which I thought was quite interesting. Yeah, quite interesting.
And what material would he have gone to? Did he explain any of that to you? Did he look at the history of spiritualism, or was he looking at it from primarily a physics perspective?
Both.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it was quite fascinating. Yes. A second experience here. Adam, this gentleman was 38 years of age. He's a sculptor and a teacher. He was married to Connie for 10 years, who was unfortunately killed at an industrial site under some pretty horrendous circumstances. Adam was referred to me by a psychiatrist, again for therapy, to assist him with his understandable traumatic grief responses. We would see each other possibly about once a week to every 2 weeks over a 2-year period. 18 months into the therapy, approaching the end of treatment, Adam came in for his regular Friday appointment. And in the consulting room, Adam started to discuss how Connie, who was an engineer, had wanted to gradually change her career to study a combination of architecture and psychology, as she wanted to design buildings with the goal of enhancing people's mental health outcomes. As Adam admired Connie's passion and focus, a storm was brewing outside, and the morning had turned almost to night with increasing lightning strikes. As I was about to excuse myself to switch the light on, a book in my office library began to levitate and drop to the floor. Without Adam or myself commenting on the event, I stood and replaced the book to its rightful place. Just as our conversation continued, the same book once again levitated and dropped to the floor with a sudden thud. This time I asked Adam if he had witnessed this. He nodded and said, and also the first time. I asked, what did you witness or see? Adam replied, the same book levitated and fell to the floor with a thump. We both laughed, acknowledged the synchronized thunderclap, at which the lights in the building flickered and went out. The therapy concluded 6 months later with Adam's complicated grief responses abated. The book that
What was the book?
Yes, it was interesting. The book that levitated and fell to the ground was C.S. Lewis's book on grief, which is only about that thin.
Right.
And as it hit the floor, it had this enormous thud, which was very interesting. Now, a few theories about that, which I said, we could probably get into future conversations. But Christopher Noel's book, There Is No Veil, and his discussion of dark matter came to mind very quickly when I was writing about that.
That's why it resonates with you.
That's why it resonates with me, yes. And a final case here, which is interesting. A young married couple, Adrian and Liz, in their early 20s, who lived in a seaside town in Victoria, had inherited, luckily, their grandparents' property, a 120-year-old property on 10 acres. Adrian and Liz were referred to me by their GP for trauma counselling, as they had witnessed as first attendees to a traumatic motor vehicle accident in country Victoria. Due to the horrific nature of the MVA, the motor vehicle accident, both Adrian and Liz were understandably experiencing poor sleep and flashbacks. Therapy was over a 2-year period. Nearing the conclusion of their therapy, Adrian and Liz began to speak about witnessing orbs flying around their property at night and over their property. Strange smells and guttural noises in the early hours, and a disc cigar-shaped UFO hovering over their house. I discussed with them to investigate the more prosaic explanations, not doubting their experiences, but to actually view this from a scientific perspective. They checked to see if there weren't anything as prosaic as Chinese lanterns or anything else resembling that floating over the houses, whether there were possums in the roof, potential gas leaks in the house, or natural gas emissions from their property to explain any altered consciousness or perception, and that was ruled out. And they installed surveillance cameras both inside and externally to the house, which they picked up on film, on digital recordings of orbs floating in and out of the house at approximately 2 to 3 a.m. Over a period of several months. Now, as the prosaic explanations were put to rest, they became more and more interested in the phenomena and started to do their own research. Now, interesting that with some of these experiences, but I would say that probably the bulk of these experiences that I encountered over 35 years of practice, the interrelated and connection with so-called paranormal experiences, ghosts, poltergeists, and whatever we wish to call them today, UFOs, UAPs, and how these intersected time and time again, which I used to doubt, but I certainly no longer do, that there is an interconnection. And I'm reaching the point through my own readings and reflections on a lot of these accounts that they tend to be not separate manifestations, but I think they come from the same source. Call it whatever we wish, but I think it's a form of meta consciousness that enters into our own dimensions, or our own dimension, and they appear in different shapes and forms, which has happened to a lot of us and most of us, I would say, if we were to sit down and just reflect upon these experiences. It certainly has happened to me. As I said, that I've got skin in the game, and once you experience something like this, it's very hard to discount it. Very, very hard.
What do you think would happen to someone who is going to, a psychotherapist and starts, and this this psychotherapist has no belief whatsoever in any of that stuff? What do you think would happen to that
I don't know if it's
patient?
even you use the word belief there with Alex. I think
or
it's an open-mindedness and
well,
looking at it from a very clinical perspective, and then reaching a point where, as he said, go and get rid of all the prosaic notions, and we'll see what we're talking about.
yeah, but I'm not. No, I'm just saying to somebody who, there are some psychotherapists that might be really closed-minded about what's going on. Right? Don't believe in that stuff.
Certainly.
What do you think would happen to that client? What would they? How would they treat them? I'm trying to get to. What would they say to them? That
I think they would pull up stumps and leave pretty quickly. I think pretty quickly within the first session they would probably gauge the type of therapist they're dealing with.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And what I was noticing from what you were articulating to us, that these stories that these people told you were coming at the end of their clinical work with you. They're actually, their grief counselling, all that, and that is quite possibly a trust that you had created with that person to feel safe, to be able to now actually turn around and speak you up with something on a much more profound level that's been gnawing at them for a long time. And you're not the only one out there. I mean, people like Kenneth Ring, who has done extensive studies in the near-death experiences, and Jacques Vallée and, Rupert Sheldrake, they all talk about this being some form of meta-consciousness, and that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot more going on here. I mean, initially, John Mack saw it quite possibly we're dealing with something extremely tactile. This is technology. His very last book before his unfortunate death was a book very similar to Jacques Vallée's book, Passport, that actually opened up this notion that we're dealing with a vast spectrum of anomalous phenomena that seem to cross over and intersect at times.
Yes.
Do you think also the mere fact that people are going through that trauma, their brain chemistry is altered, and like you were saying about DMT, that if you look back at studies, and Terence McKenna has written about this, even articulated this online extensively, that sometimes the visual acuity, the emotional ability of the brain to be more observant during these moments is heightened. And so their ability to actually perceive something on a wider scale than what we usually do in our sedentary life, or maybe in our hypnotic states that we're roaming around in, is all of a sudden offering them a much greater percentage of insight into what we deem as the invisible world around us.
Yes. I started to read a recent interview with Dr. Strassman, and I think you're absolutely right on a particular spectrum. People are able to view. This is the theory. I'm unsure about this, but people are able to view on the infrared spectrum certain anomalous phenomena. Now, DMT may be contributing to this, or it may actually be environmental factors that are creating this capacity. But again, I'm very interested in that theory, and if some of the research is correct, then yes, children certainly have that capacity to begin to view things on a different spectrum. And you and I know, Jay, that I think I've said to you that I recently bought infrared binoculars that have a digital capacity to take video. And the first time I took them out, lo and behold, what did I see? Orbs flying across the sky. These flashes of light on a clear night without any storm activity suddenly appearing and disappearing as quickly as they appeared. Take the binoculars away, or the infrared binoculars away, and what do you see? Just the normal sky.
I think Terence McKenna actually quotes numerous studies where ayahuasca actually
Yes.
raised people's visual acuity. It actually affected their ability to hear in a much greater frequency range as well. And he made some incredible assumptions about, well, maybe if it wasn't for that chemical interaction, that we may have never got out of the caves back then as Cro-Magnon, and these were the things that pushed us further into an insight of a world around us. But, you know, if we go right back to what we could say at the very beginnings in Greek and Roman culture of psychotherapy, well, psychotherapy was a bit of a mixture of psychology and metaphysics. And I think in many ways we're actually tending back towards that notion in looking again at psychedelics and things like that. And you know, I think monotheism was assistant in removing that notion of metaphysics and coming to a very sort of reductionistic perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is certainly one of the, I think, one of the more interesting books that have come out recently, apart from Christopher Noel's book, and it's The Immortality Key by Brian Murarescu. And I think a lot of people that watch Untold Network have probably come across this. But, you know, he posits some very interesting theories about, you know, the use of, you know, psychedelic beers that were induced at places like the Delphi experience, and how this could have been the beginning of, you know, modern societies. But it's a very interesting piece of research. I may not agree with all of it, but I think that it's certainly, and that's what got me thinking into about people, you know, using various substances to recreate, you know, some profound religious experiences, if we put it in those terms.
I think there was an extremely salient point before too, that, you know, that whole thing of self-medication sometimes may be people searching unconsciously for that Oz factor, that heightened moment of their abilities, and they keep going back there in a repetitive sense, but yet it doesn't occur. I think this might be a good point to just pop on a short interview that John Mack did early in the piece, so we can see someone with the credentials that you've got and just how difficult it was with them initially, and then to go out there and receive press with one of the people that have experienced this.
Skeptic when it came to this issue of alien abductions. What changed your thinking?
Yeah, when I first heard about Bud Hopkins, who was the pioneer researcher here, and that he took seriously these stories of people who reported being abducted, I thought there must be something wrong with him, and probably these people were suffering from some new form of mental illness. But in the past 4 years, I've worked now with approximately 90 people who've had these experiences, and they tell a very similar story. And initially, at least in the early years, they hadn't been in communication with each other. They were deeply distressed by their experiences. The experiences were reported in great detail. They were complex narratives of being taken by alien beings into UFOs on beams of light. They were embarrassed, ashamed to come forward about it.
And you don't think these were wild dreams,
not
hallucinations?
Not at all. These are very solid people, healthy, mentally healthy people. And the only thing I knew that behaves like that is real experience. This is not the way dreams behave. This is not the way mental illness behaves. It's not the way fantasy behaves. Some kind of real experience is occurring to these people. But if this is a real experience, that is some kind of entities, beings, intelligences are entering our world and affecting hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people according to polls, then this is something really worth looking at. So that's what I've been trying to do, is get people at least look at it, think about it.
Joan Victoria, you've had quite an emotional week, haven't you? You went public with your story just yesterday, and you've been keeping this quiet since you were a child. Tell us about your story.
Well, it happened before I was 6 years old. It's been happening ever since that time. It comes on and off so many times, you know, during the year, and then there'll be gaps that it doesn't happen. But I know these are going to go on. This is not something that I really have a lot of control about.
Meaning, what's happening? Is it a message that's going back and forth between you and who you met with earlier? Or?
It's actual, you know, being taken from either your yard or your home, and
So you're being
losing-
taken over throughout the years?
Yes. Yes.
Were you put on any kind of a table, any tests
I have
done on you?
I have recollections of being on a table, of not being able to see, my environment around me because of the incredible bright light. The light is so white, it's almost hurts to open your eyes. And a lot of times, I would, you just close your eyes because you really don't want to look, you don't want to see, you don't want to remember this.
Was it a painful experience?
I have to say there was a lot of terror years ago for me, a lot of fear, and I've really worked hard to get through all that and to come out kind of on the other side and to try to understand it and be much more open-minded, and also, to try to take the whole experience in.
Yeah. Dr. Mack, you had a falling out with Carl Sagan over this whole issue.
Well, not really a falling out. I mean, I think the difference between Carl Sagan and myself around this is perhaps at the root of the struggle that's going on about the society. We're opening up now to other realities, but Carl Sagan and many other scientists are holding to the notion that the only reality that exists is this physical world that we can see with our five senses, and that anything beyond that, to say it exists, you have to have a piece of dinner plate off of a UFO or something like that. And I'm saying, no, there are realities that are just as powerful, just as real as this one. Other cultures have known this besides ours.
Almost a spiritual dimension.
Well,
we're
or
not
at least
looking
something,
at.
as the abductees put it, another realm, beyond the veil, they say, which is now entering into our world. So we really have no category in our culture. We're opening to it now for something that comes from some other dimension, but manifests physically in our world, that crosses that sacred divide we've kept so far apart from.
Fascinating subject. We thank you both for joining us
Thanks
today
for
on this
asking us.
very controversial and emotional issue.
Thanks
thank
for
you
having
both
us.
for being with us.
And still ahead, Frank's got the forecast.
But first, a new blood test to see if your unborn baby has Down syndrome. And then the man who takes pictures of unborn babies at the
There's the fear. There's the fear right at the end.
But isn't that astounding that there
there
were
is
so many
no
moments
veil.
of synchronicity in there?
Yeah.
The age of 5, Joan there, who was so courageous. But just listening to the blowback that was occurring to John Mack in that field. And that's why I think it's really a great privilege to have you with us on Untold Radio here, because you're stepping into the quagmire of a world out there that still remains so skeptical. But these experiences are so prolific in culture, yet they're untold.
Exactly.
Well, they're told, but they're ridiculed, Yeah.
And let's not diminish this. We all still have to work and operate in this dimension and live in this dimension. That's very important. That people shouldn't necessarily go off on a tangent. And as one of your previous guests said, why would you want to reconnect with an abduction experience? Because so many things happen in this dimension, like relationships breaking down, people losing their jobs, becoming homeless, and all sorts of things. Why would you want to re-enter into that experience without having a solid footing into this dimension, and to basically have an anchor? I'm thinking that I bought, I'm having a senior moment here, but the chap in the 1970s that was abducted
Travis
in
Walton.
Snowflake, Travis Walton.
Travis Walton.
Yes.
Yeah.
Travis Walton. And he kindly wrote back to me with the DVD and said, keep looking at the stars, but keep your feet on the ground.
Yeah.
And I thought he said it in that sentence. Not that it should stop people, preclude people from researching this area, but yes, let's keep our feet on the ground and understand that if anything we're learning from the quantum physicists, the world is a lot more spookier and a lot more interesting than we're led to believe.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where we're at. But for people that have had these experiences, really take care. And if you're researching, make sure that you've got some good anchors and some good people to speak with.
And that not everything that occurs in your life is part of that anomalous spectrum. But on the same hand, I think it's really important that you do exercise caution, because this has fallen into the world of the mainstream, where exploitation, disinformation, people's perceptions tunnels, their corruption, their different way of seeing things, even probably the trauma that they've faced in the past. So I think it's just keeping an open mind. And as I keep restating, the more research I do, the further I pull back from having a hypothesis or wanting the need to have a hypothesis. The important thing to us is that we just meet so many astounding people with incredible narratives, and I want them to be able to integrate this experience back into the day-to-day life, because unfortunately we all have to wake up the next day and make enough to get by in a society that is fairly driven by narcissism and greed these days, and that's a hard enough task in itself. And
there's much to treasure about the prosaic. There really is.
Oh yes, of course there is. And it's a wondrous thing, the gift of life, and it's a wondrous thing, the gift of community and friendship. And it's an incredible privilege to have someone of your scholarship willing to go on air with us and discuss these things, Alex. We cannot thank you enough. Now, there's been so many synchronous moments in this interview. I just want to go to one last piece of live footage here. And I think in many ways it mirrors your answer to me that you wanted to keep simple and clear about how do we cope with our day-to-day mood swings or little trances we get into. Well, here's a few words from the prime libertarian. Now, don't burn this man because he's a libertarian. It's just like being a quantum physicist. There are certain camps that believe that there are extra dimensions impinging, and there's a lot of quantum physicists that believe there's not.
Another way of generating a lot of peptides is work that you really enjoy. Look at Michael Hutchison's book, Mega Brain. I'm not making any of this up. I've been joking a bit, but I'm not joking about peptides. If you're doing work you deeply enjoy, you're releasing floods and floods of peptides every day. I used to wonder, why am I so happy and most of the world is so damn miserable? What's wrong with them? I even wrote a book about it. I wrote a book called Prometheus Rising. Plug. Somebody read it. And I was trying to explain to people how to, originally had a subtitle, which the publisher, due to absent-mindedness, left out. The subtitle was How to Use the Human Brain for Fun and Profit. And that's what the book is about. And it was my best ideas about how you can use your brain more efficiently. And that was because I was grieved in my heart and sorrowful to see so much misery and suffering all over the world, and people using their brains entirely for misery and suffering. And some people, if you tell them it's Wednesday, they say, "Oh my God, it's Wednesday." They go into a collapse right away. Anything you tell them, they find it's another cause for misery. And that's because they're just not producing enough peptides. They're producing a lot of adrenochrome and other negative chemicals like that. I finally found out from this recent research on brain chemistry, the reason I'm so bloody happy is that I enjoy my work. I sit down there at the word processor when I'm not on one of these lecture tours. I sit at the word processor for about 10 hours at a bat. My wife keeps saying, "Come and eat something, for Christ's sake, you'll starve. You're going to get eye strain again. Come on." And I'm still hammering away at the word processor. And you know why I'm doing it? I'm addicted. I'm addicted to my own peptides. I'm producing more and more peptides all the time. That's why people keep climbing mountains. Somebody gets to the top of the Matterhorn and they say, "Wow, what an achievement." He says, "I want to go off to the Himalayas now. I want to take on K2. That's because he's getting high on mountain climbing. Anything you really deeply enjoy produces peptides. And that's one of the best arguments for a libertarian society. If people could do what they really enjoy, they'd all be high and happy. And high and happy people don't go around making others miserable. I have made a question.
Yeah, high and happy
High
people.
and happy.
And we're talking about a high from the peptoids.
Yeah, peptides, yeah.
Peptides, sorry, yeah. But I think it is that conscious thing of, too many of us in this culture are working at things that don't drive us emotionally. And people would be really surprised when they actually do turn to something that drives them, that how successful they can be. We had a sea change there from being therapists and became entertainers because it was something we were doing anyway,
Yeah.
but it was one of our drivers. One of the most important things we learned as an entertainer early in the piece, Alex, was not to have huge expectations. You might get an astounding support gig in front of thousands of people, but don't expect the sound engineer to be on side.
No.
Don't expect everything to work in your favor. Don't expect that audience to be overwhelmingly in love with you.
My thing for expectations, I have none. So then I can't be disappointed. And if something good happens, then I'm very, very happy. So, you know, it's like the birthday party. The kid, you know, the birthday girl or the birthday boy, they always end up crying because the expectations are always so high and it never pans out that someone has to cry. And then my sister and I always look at each other as soon as one of the kid that's the birthday kid starts crying, we go, now it's a party.
Yes.
Now it's a party. Yeah, expectations. Never have them.
So is there anything in closing, Alex, you'd like to say to our audience? And we will really do want you back as soon as possible because I think we've got a lot more to explore in that notion of mega consciousness and relate together. But I want to thank you deeply because it is an astounding privilege to have someone of your credentials and your caringness. I mean, what you've put out into the community in your working life is incredible and unique.
Thank you.
And it's only brought a positive sway into this world, and that's really important. And it's a rare thing these days that people aren't operating solely for just themselves. So we thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. And I'd like to thank you both also because what you're doing here is you know, offering a window into this really interesting and sometimes just head-shaking phenomenon that is just all around us and appears unexpectedly and challenges, you know, who we are as humans. And please keep on doing it because it's definitely what we need. And hopefully there's another series of the Down Under series
Close
that
Encounters.
was just released, Close Encounters Down Under, which was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, keep on.
Doing it, actually.
You know what? People need to be aware that you have been behind the scenes for many decades supporting us and giving us positive feedback and helping us investigate in a constructive and scientific way. So they need to know that you're one of these people that don't march around honoring themselves, but are always behind the scenes supporting others. And we can't thank you enough for your friendship, your service, and your incredible credentials that you brought to bear on this world.
And what a joy it has to have all these conversations with you over the decades with both of you. Thank you very much.
It's been great.
All right. Well, look, I think what we've got to do is we've just got to make sure we get our little Untold plug up there about membership and promos and things.
Yep.
And we'll be in touch with you, well, just about every day of the frigging week, Alex, whether you want it or not. But there is so much love in our heart for you. And please give our love to your wife. And thank you for your time today. Thank you to everyone that's been listening. Please go up and look at us. We're a heavily visual podcast.
We are.
You know, listen to us if you can. But if you get the chance, go and look at it on YouTube.
It's
And
always
please check out all the other programs. They're all astounding. And I think one of the most important things is if someone's got a different perspective and you don't see it as destructive, just keep your mind open to that.
Yeah.
I heard a bit of shade out there on the few podcasts this week that went down on Christopher Noel and Ron's Quantum Bigfoot. And you know what? It's no good throwing shade. What we need to do is be open to every different perspective.
I say we throw it all onto the table and people can pick and choose what they want to take back with them.
Yeah.
And not comment derogatorily on the stuff that's left on the table because somebody else is going to pick that up.
Yeah.
And you don't want to make them feel bad about having to pick that up. Just like you shouldn't feel bad about what you've chosen to believe or take away from something. So, you know, I really don't like negativity. Negativity is not a good force. We need positivity. And what you put out, you get back. You start putting negative stuff out, you're going to get negative stuff back, and you don't want that.
And you know what? I think it's understandable that people want to stay away from what they term the woo factor. But the point
Stay
of
away
fact
from
is,
it, but don't.
there's a broad umbrella
It's
of this
like-
phenomena, and the more I research into it, the more it keeps expanding.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's like not having a great sense of expectation with the revelations that have come out recently with David Grush there in the States, our whistleblower, with what's happening in Las Vegas. Just sit back, take a big deep breath, and know that any time to expect the unexpected, and don't necessarily buy into it, but don't necessarily discount it either. Just keep a positive, beautiful, open mind, and just adore everyone around you. That's not causing shame.
Let them be.
Yeah.
Let them be. Let them believe whatever they want to
Exactly.
believe. It's no skin off your nose. It really isn't,
You know what? At the end of the day, I'm not sure I believe in anything but love and comradeship.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the greatest stuff for me.
That is.
And then the rest of it will all fall into place.
Absolutely.
And if I can be a good enough friend or colleague to give something back, then that's about the best life can
That's
give
all
us.
you can do.
All right. Been on the Untold Radio
You have.
Network.
Thank you
This is
so much, Alex. It was a
episode
privilege to have you
35.
on.
Psychotherapy.
Thank
Talk
you, Asper.
with Anomalous.
That's it. All right.
And we love you, Alex. Take good care, and you'll be back very soon.
Okay.
Take care, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you
We'll
for
be
your
back
time.
next
Bye-bye.
another show. Bye.
Hey, Untold Radio Network fans. Want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.